with a pretty wild idea. What if I told you that a single family out in Sierra Leone might hold the blueprint for the future of, well, society? That's the huge claim from this really fascinating, but let's be honest, super dense academic paper we're going to break down today. It's all about a family called the Nuni Lapierres and how they've supposedly figured out a new way of living that could change everything. The big question is, how are they doing it? Well, let's dive in and find out.
And right away, the paper just throws you in the deep end. You get sentences like this one. Ontology is no longer a noun, but a resonant verb conducted through trust amps. Right? I mean, trust amps? What does that even mean? It sounds poetic, sure, but it's also incredibly confusing. And you know what? That's our first clue. It tells us we're not in Kansas anymore. We're about to get into some really big and really different ideas.
So yeah, that's the big puzzle we're here to solve. How does a super academic phrase like trust and peers connect to a real family living their lives in Kanema, Sierra Leone? And, more importantly, why is this author arguing that they are the model for our future? It feels like a mystery, right? So let's treat it like one. We're going to piece this whole thing together, one clue at a time.
All right, let's get into our first clue. And fair warning, this one asks us to pretty much reset how we think about, well, everything. To get what this family is doing, you have to try and see the world through their eyes. And in their world, reality is fundamentally flat. Now, this whole flatness idea comes from a pretty big philosophical concept called object-oriented ontology, or OOO. The core idea is simple but kind of mind-bending. Humans aren't the center of the universe. In this view, everything is equal footing. The diamond-rich soil in Kamena, it's not just dirt, it's an active player in the story just as much as the person digging in it. Your smartphone, it's not just a tool you use, it's an actor with its own influence, its own agency. Everything matters equally.
Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine reality is a big movie. Humanity isn't the star of the show. Nope. We're just one actor in a massive ensemble cast. In this version of the story, a river, a smartphone, an ancestral artifact, a person, they all have equally important parts to play. No one gets top billing.
Okay, so if reality itself is flat, it makes sense that your spirituality would be too, right? And that brings us to the next piece of the puzzle, something the paper calls flat theology. The idea here is to just forget about some distant hierarchical God way up in the sky. In this worldview, the divine, the sacred, it's not up there. It's right here, woven into the fabric of the material world all around us.
So what does that actually look like? Well, you don't find the divine spark in some big fancy cathedral. You find it in the friction of a farming tool scraping against the earth. You find it in the data zipping around during a crypto transaction on a smartphone, or even in the weird modern connection between an ancestral spirit and, say, a digital avatar. The sacred becomes this tangible thing you experience every single day.
And here's the really crucial takeaway from all this. When you start to see the world as flat, all those old hierarchies, humans over nature, colonizers over the colonized, they just start to fall apart. They dissolve. It creates a truly level playing field. And that is the foundation for everything else the Numi Lapierre family is building. Okay, so we've got the worldview, but what do you actually do with it? What do you build on that foundation? Well, that leads us to clue number 2. It's all about how this flat reality lets them create a totally new culture. See, they're not just passively living in the world, they are actively designing their own from the ground up. And a huge part of this is a concept called new materialist feminism. Now, forget any idea of the female body as just a passive thing. In this worldview, the women of the family, the matriarchs, are seen as these incredibly powerful forces. Their physical labor, their bodies, they're not just in the environment, they're actively collaborating with the material world to literally shape and reshape reality.
And all of this leads to what the author calls post-colonial neoculturation. I have to say, I love the phrase the paper uses, metabolizing the colonial hangover. Isn't that great? It's not about trying to forget the past or just reject it. It's about actively digesting it, taking what's useful, spitting out what isn't, and then blending it with modern tech and global ideas to build something totally new, something fiercely independent. And it's a very deliberate process, like a 3-step recipe. First, you take the leftovers from the colonial era, the language, maybe some of the laws or economic structures, and you repurpose them for your own needs. Step 2, you mix in modern global technology. And what comes out the other side? A new hybrid culture that isn't just traditional, and it isn't Western either. It's something else entirely, something uniquely theirs.
Okay, so they've got this new worldview and they're building a new culture.
But how do they actually operate, day to day? How do they get things done? Well, that brings us to our third and final clue, and it's all about a new kind of power.
The paper calls this new power structure transpolitics. And what that means essentially is that the Nuni LaPierre family doesn't sit around and wait for the official government to help them. Because let's face it, that can be slow, inefficient, or even corrupt. Instead, they've built their own parallel system. It's this powerful network based on trust, on family, on resources, and it gives them real, tangible independence.
And you can really see the difference here. Traditional state power, it's centralized, it's often really rigid. Their power, this transpolitical power, is distributed. It's fluid, it's a mesh network. It doesn't run on bureaucracy, it runs on trust, on helping each other out, and on connections to family members all over the world. It's a network, not a pyramid. And the engine that powers this whole network is technology. But, and this is a big but, they use it in a very specific way. The philosophy is called healthy techno-accelerationism. Think of it as the opposite of the Silicon Valley model of move fast and break things. For them, it's all about using tech strategically to help their community, their people, and their local environment actually thrive.
And this isn't just theoretical, pie-in-the-sky stuff. The paper gives real, concrete examples of this in action. They're using blockchain to create fair, transparent records for farmers. They've built their own decentralized solar microgrid so they have energy independence. They even use AI to help manage their resources more effectively. They're literally using the tools of tomorrow to build a better life right now.
Okay, so we've gathered all our clues, right? We have a flat reality, a new hybrid culture that's born from that, and a totally new decentralized way of wielding power. So now it's time for the big reveal. Let's put all these pieces together and finally solve the puzzle of the Nuni LaPierre family.
So when you take all these threads, the flat worldview, the neo-culture, the transpolitical power, and you weave them all together, what you get is a picture of a way of life that is incredibly resilient. Think about it. Because it's decentralized, there's no single point of failure. Because it's self-sufficient, they can forge their own path without asking for anyone's permission.
And this new world they're building, it has a vibe, a flavor, a soul. And the paper has a beautiful name for it, Afro-Cosmo-Aesthetics. It's this deeply optimistic vision that connects the ancient, deep-time history of Africa with a really high-tech, star-bound, even cosmic future. It's such a powerful statement. It says the future isn't something scary that happens to you. It's something you actively go out and build.
And that brings us all the way back to the author's huge central claim. The point of all this is that the Nuni LaPierre family isn't just some interesting, isolated story. No, the argument is that they are a living, breathing prototype, a high-resolution blueprint for how we, as a species, can organize ourselves to not just get by, but to actually thrive in this increasingly complex and chaotic world.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty provocative question to chew on. As our big global systems seem to be creaking and groaning under the pressure, could this be an answer? Is it possible that the future of society isn't the nation-state, but the decentralized, tech-savvy, self-sufficient family network? It's a radical thought for sure, but it's definitely one worth thinking about.